Finally, let's take a look at pathos strategies or pathos choices. A pathos choice is any attempt to persuade through the emotional disposition of the audience. Pathos choices work because audiences will often go along with ideas if they are placed in the right emotional state. So, writers will often attempt to stir specific emotions in the audience to predispose them to accepting the writer's ideas. We are, after all, emotional creatures, and much of our decision making is based on our emotional states. An example of a pathos strategy would be when Patrick Henry, in his second speech to the Second Virginia Convention, in paragraph 4, he questions the delegates' resolve. He questions the resolve to fight of his fellow delegates by asking them whether they will sit by while the British take everything, asking whether they intend to hold on to, quote, the delusive phantom of hope until our enemies shall have bound us hand and foot. Yeah, this is a pathos choice. Henry is clearly trying to stir an emotional response in his audience. In this case, he's trying to stir a sense of indignation or outrage. When you write about a pathos choice, there's actually one extra step as opposed to writing about logos and ethos choices. In addition to correctly identifying the specific emotion that the writer's evoking, you also have to identify the specific target of the emotion. Unless you identify a specific emotion and its target, you're not fully identifying the pathos-based technique. After that, you need to supply text evidence that demonstrates the emotional appeal, explain the pathos-based effects on the audience, and of course connect that choice to a pathos-based rhetorical obstacle. Once again, for this unit, we are ignoring rhetorical advantages. Some common emotions that writers often attempt to stir in audiences would be things like anger, which is the feeling of being disrespected by one whose respect we desire. Calm, which is the absence of anger. Fear, which is the anticipation of harm or danger to oneself. Or confidence, the anticipating benefit or safety for oneself, kind of the opposite of fear. And there are many, many, many more emotions that we are capable of feeling. And you can see the many more I have listed along with their definitions on the handout at the end of this lesson. Anytime you analyze an emotional appeal, you want to be very careful that you never try to analyze, quote, just an appeal to emotions. Yeah, this phrase is absolutely meaningless because there's so many different emotions people can experience. So make sure that you never in your writing just talk about an appeal to emotions or an emotional appeal in general without identifying the specific emotions being stirred. When identifying a pathos technique and trying to use that or phrase it as a noun phrase, try using some form of one of these, a blank appeal or an appeal to blank, such as an appeal to envy, an appeal to indignation, a patriotism appeal, or a shame appeal. Those all work to define or to identify rather the pathos technique that's being used. As we'll learn in the next quarter, there's a lot of different ways to stir emotion, and we'll learn different, more specific techniques for that when the time comes. But for now, just simply saying an appeal to blank emotion works fine. Time for our first quick write activity for this lesson. Respond to the question on the following slide reflectively and informally. Remember, the purpose here is just to get some complete ideas on the page. In this example, we could say that Henry is making an appeal to indignation, or you could also say that he's making an appeal to shame. There's two different things going on here. One, he's making the audience or trying to make the audience feel indignant, or you could call it outraged, at the actions of the British. You could also say that he's appealing to the shame of those in his audience who are refusing to stand up and fight. Those are two very different emotional appeals, and you could talk about both of them or either one in a rhetorical analysis. When you write about pathos-based effects on the audience, you want to explain how the pathos technique is intended to either make the audience feel a certain emotion, make the audience stop feeling a certain emotion, usually by replacing it with another emotion, or twist an emotion the audience is currently feeling into a different corresponding emotion. Keep in mind that some emotions are closely connected. That is, when an audience feels one, they can easily be turned to another. And these connections can be used to stir a series of emotions if a writer wants to first make them feel one thing and then this next related thing and then this next related thing, or perhaps twist emotions that the audience already feels into something the writer wants. For example, if an audience already feels pity towards someone, it's very easy to turn that into kindness toward them. Again, those are two very different emotions. One is feeling sorrow for the bad things that are happening to a person. Kindness is an actual desire to help them, and so very closely related, but not the same thing. Similarly, shamelessness to confidence to optimism, first removing an audience's shame if they feel it, then you can turn that into confidence because you try to eliminate their fears. And you can turn that elimination of fears, that confidence, into general optimism. Then, of course, we have the classic from Yoda from Star Wars: fear leads to anger, anger leads to, well, enmity, which is hate, that sort of thing. And so those are very closely related emotions as well that writers can kind of build upon. It's time for another quick write activity. Respond to the question reflectively and informally. We might explain Henry's intended effects as attempting to stir outrage toward the British for their intentions to control and pacify the colonies and take away all the things that they're unjustly taking away. Henry's trying to use that outrage that he wants them to feel to later on fuel his appeals to patriotism as well. So later on we see how he builds off of that outrage to kind of fuel his patriotic appeals. Anytime a pathos technique is used, that means there must be some corresponding pathos obstacle. A pathos obstacle would be a condition of the rhetorical situation that necessitates a pathos strategy. Some examples of pathos obstacles would be things like if the audience doesn't feel anything toward what the writer's talking about, then the writer would need them to feel a certain emotion. Also, the audience may feel some different emotion or may feel some related emotion to the one that the writer wants them to feel. Those are all examples of pathos obstacles. Let's do our final quick write activity. Respond to the question as you've done the previous two. Here, we might say that Patrick Henry is responding to the obstacle that many in his audience do not feel strongly enough about what the British are doing. We might say that coming into the speech, his audience feels a certain discontentedness about the situation, but Henry needs to twist that discontent into straight up outrage in order to get his audience to go along with raising a militia. And so that's a good example of playing upon an existing emotion and kind of twisting it into a stronger feeling there.